Books and One Click Digital present Cicero, The Life and Times of Rome's Greatest Politician, by Anthony Everitt, narrated by John Curlis.
The spring weather was unsettled in Rome. The 15th of March was a public holiday, marking the end of winter. From the early morning, crowds of people had been streaming out of the city. It was almost as if Rome were being evacuated. Families abandoned the busy streets and huddled houses and crossed the river Tiber. In the countryside, in huts made of branches or makeshift tents, they would set up picnics and consume large amounts of alcohol. It was said that the drinkers would live for as many years as they downed cups. In that case, as one wit had it, everyone ought to live for as long as Nestor, the classical equivalent of Methuselah. The Senate, however, had more serious business at hand. Its last meeting under the dictator before he departed from Rome on a military expedition to Parthia, it was due to be held not as usual in the Senate House in the Forum, but in one of Rome's most spectacular buildings, the 340-metre-long Theatre of Pompeius, just outside the city on the Field of Mars. During the first half of the morning, the senators gathered in a ceremonial hall in the centre of the complex. Among the leading figures arriving at the theatre was Marcus Tullius Cicero, now in his early 60s and by Roman standards an old man, but still handsome, with full lips, a decisive nose, and beetling brows. Rome's most famous orator, and one of the pillars of the Republican tradition, he was, in theory, in political retirement. Having sided against Julius Caesar in the recent civil war, he had reluctantly come to terms with the new regime. He still kept abreast of events. A witty man, he could seldom resist making topical jokes, often at the most inopportune moments. At the moment, he was worrying about what new flattering honour the Senate might be preparing to award Caesar. When Cicero got out of his litter, surrounded by hangers-on, waiting for his latest bon mot, he noticed leading members of the government mingling with the crowd. There was Marcus Junius Brutus, a member of one of Rome's oldest families and a favourite of Caesar's. He was joined by Caius Cassius Longinus, who had just arrived after being delayed by his son's coming-of-age ceremony. They were soon deep in a private conversation. An acquaintance interrupted them, whom Cicero heard to say mysteriously that he hoped they would accomplish what they had in mind, but that they should hurry. Brutus and Cassius reacted nervously and seemed ill at ease. A rumour suddenly went around the gathering dignitaries that Caesar wouldn't be attending the sitting after all. He and his wife had passed a restless night, and both had had bad dreams. His doctors were advising him to stay at home, fearing a recurrence of the dizzy fits from which he suffered. Furthermore, the omens from the morning's animal sacrifice were discouraging. Nevertheless, the great man at last arrived at about 11 o'clock, wearing the gold-bordered purple toga and high red boots that generals wore at their victory ceremonies. 56 years old, he was tall, fair and well-built, with a broad face and keen dark brown eyes. Years of ceaseless campaigning had left their mark on his constitution, and he looked older than his years. Known for his personal vanity, he kept his thinning hair neatly trimmed and his face shaved. According to gossip, he was also in the habit of depilating his pubic hair. The senators, who had been standing around talking, walked into the hall ahead of Caesar, but one of them came up to him and engaged him briefly in animated conversation. Meanwhile, Mark Antony, the dictator's right-hand man, was detained in an anteroom by someone with urgent business. Caesar was moving away from his litter when a teacher of
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.